It is that time now once again for getting lumped up with my friends. It's RockerMike and Rob that you should know, and you'll find them here on the Rock Show. Ooh, yeah, on the Rock Show.
Hello.
Hey, Mike, how you doing today?
Good, very good.
So this is the Rock Show episode 113, and today we're talking about guitar legend Jeff Beck, another alumni from the Yardbirds.
Yeah. I mean, you think about the three guitarists that play in the Yardbirds. You had Jeff Beck, you had Eric Clapton, and you had Jimmy Page. So that band themselves, I mean, it was pivotal.
That was like was that like the college for musicians?
Well, it was definitely one class, where they all played. I mean, Clapton left early. There was one point only for a couple of months where Beck and Page were actually together in the band. So that's pretty cool. But, Jeff Beck, let me ask you, how familiar are you with his music?
I heard some of his music, but I probably, because he played by himself for a while. He has a few records, right? Like in 1976, he had a solo album, but he played like jazz. He was very all over the place.
Yeah, and it's he's had albums going into the 2000s, but a lot of his stuff is instrumental.
Yeah.
Okay, and he is very sporadic with his recordings. He doesn't come out with an album every year. It's sometimes years in between. In the 70s, he was pretty prolific. In the 80s, he released a lot of music. In the 90s, he released a lot of music. He's an interesting guy. I have to admit that I probably only like myself maybe about 50% of his music.
Yeah.
He's a tough pill to swallow, especially when it gets into some of the jazz fusion stuff that he really was into in the 70s. But, if you sit down and you listen to the guy, even if, jazz, for instance, is not your thing, if you sit down and you listen to him, the talent on this guy is unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Dude, let me ask you, did he just release a record with Johnny Depp?
Yeah.
Is that Johnny Depp?
It was
I saw that. I'm like, what?
The Johnny Depp, the actor, okay. He released something last year. He did a cover of John Lennon's Isolation. It was just a single.
Okay.
And I think they're supposed to collaborate. Depp's been doing music too for the last 15, 20 years. He's had various. He even played, I think, with the Hollywood Vampires, right? Which was like Alice Cooper and a couple other people. He had a band with them, with different actors and stuff. He's done bands, so he plays guitar. He's pretty good. But his collaboration with Beck, they did Isolation because of COVID. Okay, everybody's isolated, so they felt it was a song to do. But Jeff Beck's an interesting guy. He's a tough guy to work with. He's a perfectionist. He's known for having a short fuse. But he's also a funny guy. Okay, he can crack a joke. He can make you laugh. But the talent on him is just unreal.
Yep.
And he's one of these guys that really I could probably count on one hand, who actually changed his own style. Okay. He started off up until about the 1980s, always using a flat pick when he would play, a regular pick. But what he got into was finger picking. Okay. And he no longer uses a pick. He uses his fingertips, or there's a finger pick. It's like a ring that you could put around your fingers to pick the strings. And that is how he plays. And that is some like intricate, difficult guitar playing. And one thing he's known for is his tone. Okay, and I'm not. I can play guitar very little. I'm not a big musician or anything, but what I know is that his tone and the way he uses tone in his guitar playing is unique to him. Some of his guitar work you wouldn't even know is a guitar. It sounds like something else. He's got stuff that he can make a guitar sound like a human voice.
Yeah.
And it's really, like I said, he's a tough pill to swallow because his music can be all over the place. But let's start at the beginning, okay? He was born Geoffrey Arnold Beck.
Was he as difficult to work like Captain Beefheart? Because Captain Beefheart was a difficult guy to work with.
Both were perfectionists.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Okay. But both. Well, Beefheart passed away. Beck's still with us, but I mean, perfectionists, absolutely in that aspect. Yeah, I would say so.
All right, so let's go to the beginning then.
Yeah, the very beginning. June 24th, 1944, Mr. Geoffrey Arnold Beck was born. His parents were Arnold and Ethel Beck, and he was born in Wallington, England. Now, as a 10-year-old boy, he was interested in music, and he sang in the church choir. But one day, he was listening as a child. He was listening to the radio, and he heard a guy play. His name was Les Paul, and he was playing an electric guitar. It was a song called How High the Moon. Now, he's on record saying that he asked his mother, what is that sound coming out of the radio? He'd never heard an electric guitar before.
No, he was fascinated by them.
Yeah. And his mother said, well, that's an electric guitar. It's all tricks and electronics to get that sound. And, when he heard that, he said that's for him. He knew it was for him. He had to learn how to play that thing. He quickly became a fan of Gene Vincent. The band was called Gene Vincent and the Blue Caps. He followed B.B. King, a guitar player named Steve Cropper. Cropper is an interesting guy. He was a Stax musician, Stax Records. He played for Booker T and the MGs, okay, which was like the Stax house band. And he also did some producing as well. Excuse me, my throat is a little dry. We just did another show right before this, right?
Yeah, man.
Excuse me. As a teenager, he was known to make his own guitars. He would use a cigar box or 2 cigar boxes and put them together. They were made out of wood. He would use a picket fence, a piece of a picket fence as the neck, and he used to paint on the frets.
Wow.
And he would use like any kind of string, metal string that he could to make his own guitars. In 1962, while attending the Wimbledon College of Art, Beck was playing in a succession of bands at that point. And he also started off playing with Screaming Lord Sutch.
Yeah, I didn't
realize he was
in. With them.
Yeah, he goes back that far. He recorded on the single Dracula's Daughter for Oriole Records for Screaming Lord Sutch. It was actually called Screaming Lord Sutch and the Savages.
Mm-hmm.
In 1963, he was friends with Ian Stewart, who was the piano player in the Stones. Ian introduced him to R&B, and everything took off from that point. He formed a band called The Night Shift, and they often played the 100 Club, which is a very popular club. He recorded a single called Stormy Monday for the Piccadilly label. He joined a band that year called The Rumbles. They were from Croydon for a short period. He was lead guitarist, and they mostly did covers. They did a lot of Gene Vincent and Buddy Holly songs. Okay. And one thing that Beck discovered he could do is he could emulate or copy a lot of people's styles when he heard them. He had a knack to do that. In other words, he could play like Buddy Holly. He could play like Gene Vincent. You couldn't tell the difference. Okay. He also played in 1963 with a band called the Tridents. What they were more of a blues, Jimmy Reed style of blues with a little rock and roll thrown in. Jeff really liked playing that kind of stuff. He also did some session guitar work for the Parlophone label, assisting a band called Fits and Starts on their single called I'm Not Running Away. Now, in March of 65, fate would come calling, and he would join the Yardbirds. Okay? How this went down, and we went into this in a lot of detail in our Yardbirds episode, Eric Clapton was leaving the band. Yeah. Eric Clapton was a founding member of the Yardbirds. He left the band because of the single For Your Love. He felt it was too poppy. He thought they were going in a direction he didn't want to go. I think there were one or two other things involved in that, but that was one of the main reasons given why he left. They needed to find somebody else, and they wanted Jimmy Page. Jimmy Page at that time was doing a lot of session work in studios. He was well known as a great guitar player, but he really wasn't available to join the Yardbirds. So he suggested, because he was friends with Jeff Beck, he suggested Jeff Beck to the band. And he joined, and they had a very successful 20-month period with Jeff in the band. The majority of the band's top 40 hits were with Jeff when he was in the band. After Jeff left, you had Jimmy Page. They weren't as commercial. They still had some great music, but they didn't sell as much anymore. But with Beck was when they had their top 40 hits. They recorded one full album. Okay, it was called Roger the Engineer when Jeff was in the band. Came out in 1966. Now, in May of 66, Jimmy Page joined the Yardbirds as well. So you had Page and Beck, this guitar attack in the band at the same time. You want to see a good video of it, check out the Michelangelo Antonioni movie Blow Up. Okay. There's a scene in there where you see the Yardbirds when they have Beck and Page in the band, and they're doing the song Strolling On. I mean, it's just badass. It's just really cool. Beck in 67 would get fired from the Yardbirds. All right. And basically it was over, like, sometimes not showing up to gigs. His perfectionism, his tempo was tough to deal with. And it was on the American tour that they did it to him. Okay. He bounced right back, though, and recorded 2 solo singles for pop producer Mickey Most. The tracks were Hi Ho, Silver Lining, and Tally Man, which featured him on vocals, which you didn't hear too much before, as well as obviously playing guitar. Now, in 67, he started the Jeff Beck Group. And this is pretty much my favorite stuff from him. It included Rod Stewart on vocals, Ronnie Wood, that Ronnie Wood, on bass guitar, Nicky Hopkins on piano, and Ainsley Dunbar on drums. Later, Ainsley would be replaced by Mickey Waller when they were going to record the Truth album. They released 2 albums. The first was called Truth. It was on Columbia Records in the UK, and it was on Epic in the United States. That came out in August 68, Truth. And the second was called Beckola, and it was released July 1969. Now, Truth had the track You Shook Me on it, and it was a song written first and recorded by Muddy Waters. But Truth came out 5 months before the Led Zeppelin debut album, which also featured the same song, You Shook Me. But they did it differently. It's a different kind of arrangement. Okay? But actually the first, Muddy did it first, but then when it comes to the British blues stuff, that would come out in the late 60s with Zeppelin and everything. Beck actually beat them to it. He did that song first. So the album starts off with a Yardbirds song, Shapes of Things, which is probably really one of the first psychedelic songs that the British had ever done. Okay. You got the Beatles, Tomorrow Never Knows, there's a few there. But Shapes of Things was the first real psychedelic single hit. I think it was top 10. It starts off with that song and it ends with I Ain't Superstitious. That was originally done by Willie Dixon. Great version of that one. The reviews for Truth when it came out were great. Rolling Stone called it a classic, an instant classic. Also, it's been considered in some circles. It's actually considered a seminal work of heavy metal. Heavy metal in the sense of like Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath coming out in '69, like that. It was a heavy, hard rock approach that had elements of blues in it. It was really a new kind of music, a hard rock. There really was nothing like that at the time. You had your pop, you had your R&B, which was the Stones, early Stones, Yardbird sound. But when it came to what he did after that, it was really heavy, and it really complemented Rod Stewart's vocal style, I think. Yeah. There's instrumentals on this album as well, but Rod does sing, all the lead vocals. And it just sounds great. I don't, Beck and Stewart together is just like, for them, it's like oil and water. They don't really get along that good, but, for the fans, it's just classic,
And that group was kind of a weird super group, like the Yardbirds too, where you got Rod Stewart, stuff like that singing.
Well, Rod Stewart was not known at that time.
No, I'm saying, but look at the Yardbird. Everybody, even with Jeff Beck, think about it, they just became famous.
They did. And Nicky Hopkins on piano. I mean, he was playing with everybody. He was playing with the Stones. Ronnie Wood was playing bass in that band, and he's normally a guitar player. Okay, he was playing bass guitar in that band. And that's how he got involved with the Faces. Right after that, Rod Stewart was in that band. That morphed into that. It's interesting. These bands all, traded members back and forth, and they all were great, One track that stands out is the instrumental Beck's Bolero. It featured Jimmy Page, John Paul Jones, and Keith Moon. Now, Moon from The Who, they couldn't put his name on the credits on the album for contractual reasons. So they actually, it said Jimmy Page, John Paul Jones, and you know who. That's what it said on the record.
That's pretty funny.
Now, it is funny. Now, the second album was called Beck Older, and that came out in July of '69. They replaced drummer Mickey Walla with Tony Newman. He was brought in to play drums. The critics loved this album, but it didn't do as well commercially compared to Truth. Okay, even though it's got some some covers on it. There's actually 2 Elvis covers, interestingly enough, on this. They do All Shook Up and Jailhouse Rock, and it's like heavy. Okay, how they do it. The band would fall apart though at this point, pretty much after the release of this album. Resentments had built up. Rod Stewart and Beck didn't get along too well. There was some incidents that happened during touring, kind of just legendary rock and roll drama, but it just, the fact that the album didn't do too good, I think Beck wanted to change gears. As a side note, it's got to be mentioned that in 1967, Nick Mason of Pink Floyd was going to ask Jeff Beck to join Pink Floyd after Sid Barrett left.
They were terrified to ask him.
But they were too scared to ask him. That's he had this reputation as kind of like a madman, So they really were too intimidated to ask him. also in '69, when the Stones fired Brian Jones, Beck was considered to replace him. Instead, they got Mick Taylor, which, they went on to make some great albums with him. I thought about that, and I can't see Beck in the Stones.
National seats, no.
Too many egos right there. I don't think, remember we were talking about Steve Marriott and how he was going to join the Stones when Mick Taylor left. Okay. And supposedly he tried out and did this like whole solo thing, and he started singing and stuff. I could see Beck doing something like that. You know what I mean? Like just he would upstage Mick Jagger, which you can't do in the Stones.
And then we just talked about, now, right, see you later.
He might upstage Keith Richards. You can't do that. After the breakup of the Jeff Beck Group, he took part in something called the Music from Free Creek, which was like this super session project of a bunch of people. Now, he used the name A.N. Other. Okay, he didn't use his name. And he contributed lead guitar on 4 songs, including one co-written by him. Other people who played on this album was Eric Clapton, Dr. John, Todd Rundgren, Keith Emerson, Linda Ronstadt. A bunch of people were on this. And it was kind of like a jam session.
That's
I was actually I had never listened to it before, and I checked it out last night, and it's got some like interesting things. Like there's an Eric Clapton section to it where he's, it lists like the people playing with him, and then there's different people singing, and it's pretty cool how it was put together. At the end of the summer of '69, he teamed up with Vanilla Fudge's rhythm section. That was bass player Tim Bogert, who just recently died, and drummer Carmine Appice. The guys from Vanilla Fudge were in England to resolve some kind of contract issues they had, and a plan was put in place to kind of like jam, with Beck. However, in December of '69, he got into a very bad car accident, and Beck suffered a fractured skull. So they had to shelve the plans. It was actually, the plans would be shelved for 3 years. Bogert and Appice would actually start the band Cactus in the meantime, while he recovered. Now, in '70, after a long recovery, Jeff set about forming a band with drummer Cozy Powell, and producer Mickey Most was brought in. Beck, Powell, and Most flew to the U.S., and they recorded several tracks at Motown's famous Studio A in Hitsville, USA, in Detroit, with the Funk Brothers. Right. Now, think about that, okay? The Funk Brothers was Motown's studio band, okay? The house band that all the music that you heard, whether it was Smokey Robinson, Marvin Gaye, the Supremes, the Temptations, all used the Funk Brothers. So Beck was going to jam with them, and they actually recorded some stuff, but for some reason, it's never been released, and I've never heard it, and I could only imagine what it sounds like. And I guess it wasn't released because Beck probably felt it wasn't good enough. I don't know. I have no idea why that happened. But in April of '71 now, a new Jeff Beck Group was formed. Okay, totally different than the first one. He brought in guitarist, singer Bobby Tench, keyboard player Max Middleton, and bassist Clive Chayman. The new group was very different. Okay, it had more elements of soul and R&B and even jazz. The album was called Rough and Ready. That was the first album they recorded, and it was released in October of '71. 7 songs were on this album, including Got the Feeling and Situation, I've Been Used. 6 songs were written by Beck, and one called Max's Tune was written by Max Middleton. The album did modestly well. A second album came out, and it was going to be recorded at the TMI studios in Memphis with the same lineup. Now, Beck employed Stax guy Steve Cropper that we mentioned before to produce this. There's 9 songs on this album, and each has a very strong soul influence, including a version of Stevie Wonder's I Got to Have a Song. He was a big Stevie Wonder fan, Jeff Beck. Shortly after this release, Beck broke up the band to begin collaborating again with Bogert and Appice. Cactus had fallen apart, so they were ready to jam again. There were some contractual problems, though, when he did this, related to touring. And even though Bogert and Appice were playing with Beck, they had to be called the Jeff Beck Group for a little while. Okay. What they did is they actually brought in Max Middleton, and vocalist Kim Milford joined the lineup. And after 6 shows, Bobby Tench came back. Kim Milford left. And there was a show at the Arie Crown Theater in Chicago that they would potentially be brought back to, and then he would continue the rest of the tour that ended in Seattle. It was at that point that Tench and Middleton left the band for good, and then they had left the power trio of Beck, Bogert, and Appice. Drummer Carmine Appice became the lead singer. Okay, so you had a, just picture that. This power trio. You got Beck on guitar. You got Bogert on bass. Appice dead in the middle on stage singing while he's playing drums. Okay. Very rare kind of thing in rock and roll. You don't see too many drummers being the lead singer. Occasionally Beck and Bogert would put in a vocal here and there, but it was mostly Appice doing the singing. In April of 1973, the album Beck, Bogert, and Appice was released on Epic Records. The critics enjoyed it. They enjoyed the musicianship of these guys, but commercially, the album didn't do too good, okay? Except for its cover of Stevie Wonder's hit Superstition. That was a moderate hit off that album, but it didn't sell a lot of records. One thing I wanted to mention with this band is, with Beck, Bogert, and Appice, is he brought something into the mainstream called a talk box. You know what a talk box is, Rob? A talk box is it was made most famous by Peter Frampton. It's that thing that the guitar players, you talk into it, blow into it, and it creates like a sound, and you could play the guitar through it. It has a long tube that goes down into the guitar, and electronically, you could play it while you're talking, and it's interesting. I'm not a fan of it actually, but I don't really like the sound of it. But it was very popular, and Beck actually was one of the first guys to really use it in a big way. July 3rd, 1973, Beck joined David Bowie on stage, and they performed the Gene Genie, Love Me Do from the Beatles, Round and Round by Chuck Berry medley. The show was recorded and filmed, but Beck's material was never used. Now, that's the Ziggy Stardust movie, I believe. Okay? I think that's the only film that Bowie was doing in 73. And that's the show at the Hammersmith Odeon in London. I've always heard that there were things cut out of that. I didn't know that Beck actually was part of that. In early January of 74, Beck, Bogert, and Appice played at the Rainbow Theatre in London as part of the European tour they were on. The show was broadcast in full on the American show Rock Around the World in September, later on in the year. The live material from this show was meant to be for a new studio album, the songs they were doing. 2 tracks, Blues Deluxe and BBA Boogie from this concert were later included on the Jeff Beck compilation Beckology, released in 1991. But Beck, Bogert, and Appice would break up while recording their second studio album. They actually brought in producer Jimmy Miller, who did a lot of work with the Stones, to come in and do this album. It all kind of fell apart in the studio.
It's amazing how many times they got together, break up, separated, get together, break up.
Yeah. He was very, I think he just had his way, and if you didn't follow it, you were gone. He was the star, Jeff Beck.
Was another amazing thing about him, how like he always had pretty good, like, even if they weren't very even if they didn't sell a lot, he still had very good like the critics loved him.
Yeah, because musically he's amazing.
So loved the music, but it wasn't selling, which is amazing.
Yeah, I mean, in those days, and we've talked about this many times, you could do that. Okay, you could build on your inventory of music. Okay, you could build on it. You can make an album 2 or 3 in a row that kind of bomb, and the record company would stay with you. Okay, because they trusted your talent. It's not like that today. Okay, now it's if you don't make them $1 million right away, they drop you. Okay, which is sad because it just takes away from the quality. That's why everything sucks today.
Yeah, because people it's so fucking funny how you hear something today that within a few days it's like gone because it didn't sell. It just doesn't move. It's amazing.
Yeah, and it could be a big artist too. It doesn't even have to be just some no name. Okay, if a big guy today, like you ever hear from like Kelly Clarkson anymore?
She does the talk show now.
Huh. That's what she does, right? I don't know, but maybe that wasn't a good example. But like, people that were huge just gone.
What happened
whatever.
to this person?
Exactly. In October of '74, after a brief collaboration with a jazz fusion group called Up, Jeff began to record some instrumentals at AIR Studios with keyboardist Max Middleton. He brought him back. Bass player Phil Chem and drummer Richard Bailey. They had George Martin, famous Beatles producer, and arranger, come in. And it was Jeff Beck's solo album, Blow by Blow. And it came out in March of '75. These kind of evolved from those sessions that they had. It was a show. It basically this album showcased Beck's technical ability in jazz. Okay. He was a big fan of jazz. He's a big fan. Okay. And in '75, that was kind of a bold move. Okay. He was listening to things like Thelonious Monk, Miles Davis, stuff like that, from the '60s. And he was one of the only guys really listening to that stuff. Eric Clapton a little bit, I think, was into it. Some other guys, but not to go out and actually start playing, jazz fusion kind of stuff. But this album, Blow by Blow, did very well. It got to number 4 in the charts. And to this day, it's still his most commercially successful
Mike, let me ask you a rumor about that record. He recorded, supposedly he called George Martin and said he wanted to re-record something. The guy said, no, it's in the shops already. You can't freaking re-record something.
Right. I was actually going to tell that story. What happened is when he was making Blow by Blow, he would just go back into the studio every day and overdub his solos, and he wasn't satisfied. He felt the mix wasn't good. He would go back in and dilly-dally with things and try to fix it. It became kind of a joke, actually, between him and Martin. And one day he wanted to go back to the studio and do another overdub. And Martin said, you can't. The song's in the album's in the fucking shops now. We just released it. You can't do anything. Yeah. I mean, that shows, how much of a perfectionist he is. Now, riding high on some of this commercial success, he put a live band together for a U.S. tour. He toured through April and May of '75, mostly in support of the Mahavishnu Orchestra. Okay. His band consisted of Max Middleton on keyboards, but a new rhythm section, bass player William Bascombe and famous sessions drummer Bernard Pretty Purdy. They called him Pretty Purdy. He would return to the studio for a new album called Wired in '76, which paired him up with ex-Mahavishnu Orchestra drummer and composer Narada Michael Walden. Okay, and he would collaborate with him in future years as well. Keyboardist Jan Hammer. Okay, I'm sure you know that name. What famous theme song did Jan Hammer do?
Oh, Jesus.
You know it.
I know once you told me, I'm going to be like singing it.
The Miami Vice theme.
Dude, no, what? What's it, the Miami Vice theme?
Yeah. Jan Hammer. Jan Hammer did the Miami Vice theme.
For some reason, I was told that Miami Vice team was what you call it, In the Air Tonight.
No, you're thinking Phil Collins. Yeah, that song was featured in the first episode of Miami Vice. But the theme to Miami Vice, in the beginning when they're on the boats and you see all the shit happening, that was Jan Hammer a few years later.
That's pretty funny, man.
Yeah. I mean, he was a jazz. He was a German guy. He's a jazz musician.
Especially with a name like that.
And right. So he put this band together with Jan Hammer and Walden, and the album Wired was a jazz rock album in that style, kind of similar to what Hammer and Walden were doing on their own. To promote the album, Beck joined forces with the Jan Hammer Group, and he played a live show supporting Alvin Lee at the Roundhouse in May of '76 before embarking on a 7-month world tour. Now, this resulted in the live album called Jeff Beck with the Jan Hammer Group, and that came out in '77. Beck's got a lot of live material.
He got so much stuff that to buy something with him, it's like, holy shit, man, what the hell?
Yeah, it's a lot to choose from. And you don't, you got to know a little bit about Jeff Beck before you dive in, so you know what you're getting. At this point in 1977, Beck was actually a tax exile from the UK. Okay, he had been living a few years in the States, but in the autumn of '77, he would return back to the UK to live. And in November of '78, with return to forever bass player Stanley Clarke, keyboardist Tony Hymas, and Simon Phillips of Jack Bruce's band, Jack Bruce from Cream, on drums, he toured Japan with those guys. After he's very big in Japan. Now, after returning, he went into the Who's Rampart Studios in London and continued recording sporadically through 1979. The result would be an album called There and Back, and released in June of 1980. It featured 3 tracks composed and recorded with Jan Hammer. 5 tracks were written by Tony Hymas. Clarke would be replaced by a guy named Mo Foster on bass for the album, and he would continue on with some subsequent tours going forward.
Crazy about Beck, he always surrounded himself with very good other musicians, if you notice.
Yes, he always had
great people. Like you might not know the name, but if he's playing with Beck, you know the guy's a good musician.
Yeah. I mean, he's one. Despite his reputation of being difficult to work with, everybody wants to work.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, you're really riding the coattails of that guy. I mean, just to say that's on your resume, I played with Jeff Beck. It's amazing. In '81. Beck made a series of historic live performances with his Yardbirds predecessor, Eric Clapton. Now, I remember this very well, okay? It was something called The Secret Policeman's Other Ball. And it was Amnesty International had put this together. It was a bunch of benefit concerts. He appeared with Clapton on the tracks Crossroads, Further On Up the Road, and his own arrangement he did of Stevie Wonder's "'Cause We've Ended Up as Lovers." "'Cause We've Ended as Lovers." Beck was also prominently featured in an all-star band finale for that. They do it's Eric Clapton, Sting, Phil Collins, Donovan, and Bob Geldof do a performance of "I Shall Be Released." Now, this was a very successful set of shows, and it actually ended up being a film. Okay, it was a concert movie, right? It came out in 1982. Yep. And the reason I remember this is MTV used to play clips from this as videos. Do you remember that at all?
MTV used to play clips of all that stuff, yeah.
Yeah, I remember Eric Clapton being featured a lot. Beck, I remember Sting being featured. It was just something. Amnesty International in the 80s were, they were huge. They were doing a lot of these benefit things. And Geldof got involved with Live Aid with them.
They were very well known, and that's another thing. They just dropped out. Are they even still around?
Yes, they are. But it's the world's different now. You don't have to have these big benefit shows anymore. They're hard to put together, and there's a lot of overhead. Even though nobody's getting paid, really, you still got to pay people to put it together. Okay. Also, if you look into a lot of the history of some of these shows, Live Aid was not a big success. A lot of the money never got to where it was supposed to go.
A lot of time they ran out of money. That's the problem.
Yeah, and then also, I mean, if you remember, Live Aid was for World Hunger for Ethiopia, right? Okay. Well, at that time, Ethiopia was in a civil war. So you was pumping money in. You know who took that shit? Just the fucking army. You know what I mean? They took whatever food and stuff, they just snatched it up. But some stuff did get to where it was going. It wasn't a complete failure. But there was, in the 80s, there was a lot of other kind of benefits things. There was something called the Arms Concert, and that was for multiple sclerosis that Jeff Beck got involved with. He played with Eric Clapton and Jimmy Page in this long jam. They did a version of Layla. They did a version of a song called Tulsa Time. That's also been filmed as well. In 85, Jeff released the album Flash. Okay, and this is another thing I very much remember when this came out. He featured a variety of vocalists on this album, but the main thing that I remember is this was his reunion with Rod Stewart.
Yeah.
Okay. They hadn't done anything in many, many years, not since the Jeff Beck Group in the 60s. And they did a cover of Curtis Mayfield's People Get Ready. Okay, great song. And we're going to be doing a show in the not too distant future on Curtis Mayfield. I'm preparing that. There's a book I'm reading.
Curtis Mayfield's huge, man. That guy was huge.
Yes, he was huge and very talented.
Great singer.
The song "People Get Ready" and its video was actually a big MTV hit. It was in heavy rotation most of that year in 1985. The reunion of these two guys resulted in a short tour with a few dates, but a larger tour didn't materialize. I think, their old feuds and stuff got back started up
once
again.
Once you get that, you're not coming. It's hard to get together.
Exactly. But, when you see that, I always like the video, and I sent it to you last night to take a look at it. I always like that video because there's it's corny, okay? But it's just like you see them sending letters to each other, and then Beck shows up on the train and they give each other a hug. They hadn't seen each other. I was kind of like, wow, I wonder if they really felt like they hadn't seen each other in so long they had to give each other a hug, But it's, I always liked that version of it. And I actually like Rod Stewart. Some of his music sucks, okay, but I always liked his voice. I think he's just got a great
that nice
voice.
Scratch that guy
Yeah, that rough voice, raspy voice, and he still has it. He still has it, despite all the coke that went up his nose. I mean, it's amazing that he still has that voice.
Great voice,
Yeah. Now in '89, he had taken a 4-year break after that Flash album. He made a new album of instrumentals called Jeff Beck's Guitar Shop. Now, this was the first album to feature Beck using that finger style guitar playing, finger picking, okay, like I mentioned earlier, and not using a flat pick that he always used as a guitar player. It was only his third album to be released in the 80s. The main reason for this is that he battled for many years with tinnitus. And tinnitus is when you have that ringing in your ears. And a lot of musicians get this. Back in the day, guys, were right on top of the Marshall amps, and they didn't wear, any protection in their ears, no earbuds, or anything, earplugs, I should say. Pete Townsend from The Who has it very badly. Brian Johnson from AC/DC almost lost his hearing for similar reasons. These guys just didn't protect themselves. People do it now. You see musicians with, earbuds in their ears and everything like that. I hate the way that looks, but I guess in the long run, it's good. Okay. In the 90s, however,
he had people that played with Motorhead, how fucking ringing they must.
Shit, let me tell you something. I never saw an earplug in Lemmy's ear. Okay, I don't know how he didn't go deaf. Motorhead is the loudest band I had ever seen, and I saw them probably about 10 times, and I would be deaf for 2 days after a Motorhead show. You'd have that ringing, I remember one time I saw them at L'Amour's in Brooklyn. Had to be in the 90s. Had to be maybe mid to late 90s. And I remember I was checking out, my buddy Keith. He's been on the show. Okay, he had a little band for a little while, and I was checking out his band. I had to leave early to go see Motorhead at L'Amour's, and I was deaf for 2 days because I was really close to the stage, and God. But yeah, I mean, tinnitus is no joke, and Beck has it. They've made great strides in treating that and curing it. I don't think they could really cure it, but they could control it with medication. In the 90s, he started to put out a little bit more music again. He played on Jon Bon Jovi's debut solo album called Blaze of Glory.
Yeah, I remember that. Very good.
Yeah. It was also the song was the theme to Young Guns 2. Remember that? Yeah. He also contributed to the score for the film Days of Thunder.
The Tom Cruise car one, right?
Yeah. The music that you hear throughout the movie is Jeff Beck on guitar. He played on lead guitar on Roger Waters' album from 1992 called Amused to Death. It was a concept album that Waters put out. Beck played the lead. He also contributed to Kate Bush's album, The Red Shoes, in 1993, and Beverly Craven's Love Scenes. Her album came out in 1993 as well. In 92, he recorded the instrumental soundtrack album for the film Frankie's House. I believe that's a movie about Vietnam that was made in Australia. It's supposedly very good. Also for Crazy Legs in 1993, that was a tribute album to Gene Vincent. Okay, and we know that he was a big fan growing up of Gene Vincent. Beck also rehearsed with Guns N' Roses. I thought this was very interesting. They were going to be playing in Paris in 1992, and before to get ready for the shows in Paris, they were doing some rehearsing, and he was supposed to play with them. He actually was rehearsing, and drummer Matt Sorum dropped a cymbal right next to him, and it triggered off his tinnitus, and he actually became temporarily deaf.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, and he couldn't do the show.
That's fucking crazy just by dropping a cymbal. That's pretty intense.
Well, yeah, I mean, and, that's how that works, okay? If you remember Brian Johnson from AC/DC, they told him, if you play again, in a live show, you're going to go deaf. One time, you would go deaf forever. So he had to stop. And then who took over? Axl Rose, right? Was doing some shows. And I heard he did a good
everybody
job.
says that. I couldn't see Axl Rose or AC/DC, but everybody say he did a good job.
I could see it. He's got the vocal range, I think, to do it. But it's Axl Rose. He's just not dependable. But he actually did a good job.
Everybody would say he did a very good job. Like, nobody knocked him. Everybody say he did a good job. It's just when you first heard it made no sense. Like, what?
Yeah. Well, that's hard to fill
you're
those
thinking,
shoes.
Like, what?
Yeah, how's that going to work? Yeah, exactly. Also in 1992, I thought this was hilarious. The Yardbirds got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and Beck went up on stage. Now, sadly, Keith Relf, the singer, was already dead at that point. Remember, he had been electrocuted. Yeah. So it was the remaining members of the Yardbirds, and Beck made a speech, and he says, "Someone told me I should be proud tonight, but I'm not. Because they kicked me out." They did. He says, "Fuck them." But everybody, it was a joke. He wasn't like being a dick. He just was like making a joke about it. Now, he would accompany Paul Rodgers from Bad Company on the album Muddy Water Blues, which was a tribute to Muddy Waters in 1993. It would be another 6 years in 1999 when he released the guitar electronica kind of album called Who Else? The album marked a new collaboration with this female guitar player named Jennifer Batten. And it was the first time he really worked with another guitarist on his own material since playing with the Yardbirds. If you think about his lineups, he never had another guitar
until this
player.
One.
Not until this girl, okay? And she would be on, I believe, 2 albums with him. They did a world tour, okay? And the next album was called You Had It Coming, and that was in 2001. Now, Beck would get his 3rd Grammy Award that year, and this one was for the Best Rock Instrumental Performance for the song Dirty Mind on the album You Had It Coming. He's won 8 Grammys altogether.
He's a guy that's very well decorated. The problem is, it doesn't always bring commercial success.
Yeah, and that's, it shouldn't matter when it comes to the Grammys.
Yeah.
Okay. The Grammys are very commercialized. It might as well be, whoever sells the most gets a Grammy these days. But the fact that they've given Jeff Beck these Grammys, he's got their respect, because that's kind of like against what they do now. That's actually an example of them doing the right thing. Okay, because he's very talented. Doesn't sell a whole lot of records anymore, but very talented. Now, he would win his 4th Grammy for the song called Plan B.
2003, right?
Right. And that was off the album just titled Jeff. It was for Best Rock Instrumental again. He's won, most of them have been for that because it's mostly instrumentals. Beck opened up for B.B. King that year in the summer of 2003. And he also appeared at Eric Clapton's Crossroads Guitar Festival in 2004. It's there that it's not there, but that same year, he also contributed to the Toots and the Maytals album, True Love. That's a good album. I'm a big fan of Toots and the Maytals. Toots just died back in 2020 of COVID. We lost him. I think he was about 74. Me, my wife Sandy, and Feo, our good friend Feo from the International Bar, went to go see Toots last year before COVID. I guess it was like late 2019. And that album, True Love, is like a redoing of his earlier, like re-recording of his early reggae hits from the late 60s, early 70s. And it's worth a listen because there's a lot of like all-star people playing on it and everything. And Beck does a cover of with Toots singing. He plays guitar on the song 5446 Was My Number, which was Toots' number when he was in prison. That was the number on his prison number. Now, in 2007, Beck appeared with Kelly Clarkson on her cover of Patty Griffin's Up to the Mountain. That was during an American Idol episode called Idol Gives Back. Jeff Beck was on stage on that show. In 2009, Beck announced a world tour again, which featured a recorded show at Ronnie Scott's in London, which is a famous jazz club. Okay. He also appeared on the track Black Cloud for Morrissey's album that year called Years of Refusal. So he's playing with everybody. Gets around. Now, in 2009, Beck also got into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a solo artist. And Jimmy Page was the one inducting him in that night. He played with Page, Ronnie Wood, Joe Perry, Flea from the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and the members of Metallica on the song Train Kept a Rolling. I remember that. I actually watched that. In April of 2010, Beck released the album Emotion of Commotion. And it's an album of like originals and covers. He does a version of Over the Rainbow. Okay. Vocalist Joss Stone and Imelda May do some of the guest vocals.
And he won another Grammy.
Right. And he would win a Grammy with that as well. I like Imelda May. Are you familiar with her at all? She's does like rockabilly kind of stuff. Okay. Sort of. Okay. She's got a great voice. There's a song she did called Psycho, which is really good. Now, he also in 2010 collaborated with Herbie Hancock on his Imagine project, okay, with Seal was on this, Pink, some other big people were on it.
Young.
Right. It had to do with like Imagine from John Lennon, okay? He began a world tour in 2010 as well with Narada Michael Walden again on drums, Rhonda Smith on bass, and Rasone Rebello on keyboards. A live album came out of that called Live and Exclusive from the Grammy Museum, was recorded on October 25th. He also recorded a DVD that year called Rock and Roll Party at the Iridium Theater here in New York City. It was a tribute to Les Paul, okay? And Imelda May joined him on that. When Les Paul started out playing, and remember Jeff Beck said he heard, as a kid, Les Paul on the radio? Okay. Les Paul had a woman named Mary Ford who would do the vocals while he played the electric guitar. So Imelda May did the vocals while Jeff did the Les Paul stuff, okay? In 2011, Beck received 2 honorary degrees from the British universities for his outstanding contribution to the field of music. One was from the University of the Arts in London, and he also got an honorary doctorate from the University of Sussex, just for his contributions. In 2013, it was announced that he will be performing on Beach Boys founder Brian Wilson's new solo album on Capitol Records. This was interesting. It never actually materialized, but on the 20th of June of that year, it was announced on Brian Wilson's website that the material might actually turn into 3 albums. Okay? One album was going to be, a 3 LP set, okay? And one of the albums was going to be just instrumental tracks with Beck and everything. Now, it never happened. Okay, he did an 18-day tour in the fall of that year with Brian Wilson, though. And Beck called it just an honor to even be on the stage with him. I don't know why it never materialized. I was trying to find that out in my research. Brian Wilson is a little eccentric. We might do a show on him in the very near future as well.
But it's that stuff didn't come out. That must have been really good stuff.
Yeah, I don't know if it was ever actually recorded. I think they might have done some stuff in between doing some of those dates, but I don't know if they ever actually got into the studio and really put anything down. But who knows? Maybe it'll come out someday. In 2019, he began a tour of Japan, and actually a 3-track CD came out called Yosoga. It came out on April 5th of that year. He was working on a whole album, but he didn't have time to finish it, so he just released like this short three-song kind of EP. Okay, before the tour began. In 2016, though, he released a full album called Loud Hailer. Now, April 16, 2020, Beck released a new single. Okay, we mentioned this earlier, which was a collaboration between him and Johnny Depp. And it was the John Lennon song Isolation. Yeah. And, they announced that they will be working together. Let's hope that they do. It should be interesting. Isolation, that song was picked because of the pandemic. A lot of people are in isolation.
Yeah, a lot of people, especially like.
Well, we're getting out of it, right? I mean, we're getting out of it.
Hopefully,
Yeah, and that's all I got for you, Mr. Rossi. Jeff Beck is still out there.
Yeah, what a history, man. What a legacy, man, for the years and years, man. Think about how much shit he put out. That's good stuff. Even to today, it still stands.
Yeah. I mean, and again, like I said in the beginning, he's a tough pill to swallow. There's a lot of music, a lot of different styles. He's, generally the focus. He's the guitar player. Okay, he doesn't usually play with other guitar players. Okay, there's exceptions, but usually he doesn't. The focus is on him. When you listen to him, I mean, even if it's a song you're not crazy about, but the guitar work is just amazing. And I'm a big fan of, obviously, the Yardbirds. I'm a big fan of the first Jeff Beck Group that he had with Rod Stewart. And I do like some of the other stuff. Even some of the jazz stuff is not bad. I mean, I've become more interested in jazz over the years as well. But he's definitely a talent. And, I appreciate him actually probably more now than I did years ago. Even some of the other stuff that I didn't always like.
Yeah, but he was definitely all over the place, man. But he definitely loved the jazz,
Yeah. Well, I think, I don't know what it is about musicians. They all end up liking jazz at some point. So. It just becomes like, I think because jazz is it's very difficult to play. It's really kind of like, especially like freeform jazz and stuff. It's just not, it's not 3 chords, man. You gotta know what you're doing.
It's amazing. So, thank you for another exciting episode. This is 113 episode we've done so far.
Right. And we've been doing well. We've been doing well on the charts again. You got to mention that.
Especially in Sweden, we got to give a big shout out. Japan, Switzerland, New Zealand, and even the UK. We're doing good in everywhere so far. In the US, we even reached what was the highest?
133, I think, on Apple Podcast charts. So, hey, if we crack the top 100 soon, we'll be up there with some big podcasts. So I want to thank all the fans. I mean, we're just 2 guys talking shit, talking music, the conspiracy shows, talking that stuff, doing our interviews. But and you and Freak John doing your thing. You got that wrestling, talking wrestling now, right? You got your Let's Dig In cooking show. So the whole lumped up universe has really taken off. And I want to thank all the fans, especially our fans that have really been with us since the beginning. You know, guys in the bar and stuff, and love them all.
What's funny? I don't say this no more, but the dig in is pretty much exclusive just for the YouTube channel.
Right, you did put it just on the YouTube.
I can't figure out a way how to talk about food and just put on a podcast. And then the talking wrestling is just me going back into history and talking about a match that happened.
Yeah. Well, there's an audience for that, man. I mean, a lot of people like talking that old shit.
And I'm surprised so far. I did 2-3 of them, and they got 1,000 followers. So there's some. Yeah, and it's probably old school guys that just like remember 605 wrestling on TVS. That was forever. Into like 2000, they stopped doing it.
Right. Who do we got coming up next week, Rob? We got a couple of good shows. I think the Jesus and Mary chain.
Yeah, I think it is Jesus and Mary chain. Hold on, let me look at my.
And maybe Credence after that.
I'll give you a list of the schedule right now. I got.
Read off the next few weeks.
Right here. I was looking at it before because I was seeing what number this was. Because we did 112, but we pretty much did 2 episodes back to back today.
Yeah,
which is good, Okay, so we got the Jesus and Mary chain. We got Credence, and then we got Crash.
No, Crash, the punk rock band Crash. Yeah, that's going to be a big show.
Curtis Mayfield, the history of all music. Yeah,
of Oi music. Yes, and we mentioned Feo before. Might bring him in on that because he's a big Oi guy. Oi being working class punk rock. We're going to talk about that whole history. That has an interesting history. Yeah, so we got some great shows lined up, man. The Animals.
Dude, even going all the way to we got the schedule all the way to June.
Wow. Well, half the year, man. I got to figure out the other half. If anybody has some suggestions, let me know.
Check this out. July 26th, we got Jeff Lynne and Roy Woods, The Moves, The Winter.
Yeah. I'm gonna talk. We're gonna talk about the Jeff Lynne, who was in ELO, and Roy Wood, who was with Jeff Lynne in a band called The Move in England. There's a really interesting history. A lot of people don't know about it. With these two bands, Wizard came out of The Move, but first there was ELO when they went on to have some smash hits, especially in the 70s. That's going to be an interesting show.
Look at June's rock show. Phil Spector, about the Puto, Muddy. Oh my God.
About the Hoople.
A lot of research coming up. Yep.
It seems like that's all I do, but it's a labor of love.
Mike, how can we get in touch with you if we have to?
Okay, I'm all over the place. I'm on Instagram, RockerMike212. You can find me on Parler under RockerMike. You can find me on MeWe under RockerMike. You can find me on CloutHub under RockerMike. You can find me on Facebook under Michael Baker. And then, of course, we have the Rockshow podcast group page that me and you do on Facebook. Check that out. Join up.
Yeah, it's definitely join up. And me, you can find me, you can drop me an email at robRossi@gettinglumpedup.com. You can get me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and any other platform that we're pretty much on. And if you don't know where we at, just go to Google and look Getting Lumped Up. And I'd like to thank iHeartRadio for picking up all our shows.
Yeah, they only had like a few, right? They put them all up. All the 300 shows.
It's amazing. Can you believe we got 350 shows?
You told me that, and I went like, holy shit, I can't believe it.
So if you guys want to show us some love, go on iHeartRadio and hit us there to listen to the show. Also, I'm we're like in so many we're so many.
Spotify.
But Spotify is pretty much our bosses. So
yes, they have the podcast.
But
It's kind of like with
Anchor
them, right?
is bought by Spotify, so we are
right.
Technically we're with Spotify. All right, Mike. So remember, next week we got a big show, and like we always say, don't get drunk.
Don't get.
The only podcast you will hear that will be music to your ears. You'll learn about bands you love or may not know, and it's only here on the Rock Show. Ooh, yeah, on the Rock Show. Ooh, yeah, on the Rock Show. So tell your friends and everyone you know. Let's get lumped up on the Rock Show. It is that time now once again.